Hi guys, Jordan with Motion Array, and it's no surprise that we love Premiere Pro, but we also love DaVinci Resolve, like a lot. So today we're going to be comparing these two programs and seeing which one might be better for you. Okay, so to start it all out, we wanted to just give you a heads up that in preparation for this video, we noticed that there was a big trend of people saying to just ditch Premiere Pro completely and switch to Resolve because it's totally superior. Truthfully, we have a lot of love for both of these products and we want to try to take a bit more of a neutral approach. We're going to be covering a bunch of different topics, so this table of contents might actually help you out if you want to skip to a piece of information in specific. Bottom line, we wanted to let you know what we thought each of these programs was great at, where each of them fell a little bit short, and then maybe which one was actually better suited to your particular needs. But to start it off, let's go over a topic that you're going to be encountering first, the price. When it comes to price, it's really hard to beat DaVinci Resolve because it's free. Well, kind of. I mean, their free version is free, but the free version has pretty much all the same functionality as the paid studio version. And we're going to go over what the differences between those two are in a second, but what we really want to get across to you is to download DaVinci Resolve for free. It's amazing, and it's free. Like, there's literally no reason not to download it. So what we need you to do is, pause this video and go download DaVinci Resolve. Why are you still watching this? Pause the video and just do it! On top of their free version, DaVinci Resolve has their paid studio version, which comes in at a price of one payment of $299 US. When you compare that to Premiere Pro's subscription-based model, then Premiere Pro is actually a lot cheaper, but only for about a year, and then it starts to get more and more expensive every single month that you continue using it. And that's assuming that you're only using Premiere Pro. A more one-to-one example would be to actually be using other forms of Creative Cloud software like After Effects and Audition, which compare a lot more to Fusion and Fairlight found within DaVinci Resolve. The full price of licensing Premiere Pro with the surrounding products is going to be $52.99 per month, which makes it more expensive than DaVinci Resolve after only about 6 months of use. Needless to say, DaVinci Resolve, especially with its free version, is so much more economical than Premiere Pro, it's not even funny. There's a clear winner here, and it's DaVinci Resolve. But just so that you're 100% aware, the free version of DaVinci Resolve does have some minor limitations. No support for footage above ultra-high definition resolution, basically nothing above traditional 4K, limited multi-editor collaboration tools, a bunch of effects have been disabled like lens flare and film grain, no noise reduction, no face refinement, no lens correction, no 10-bit support for the GH5. This is not an exhaustive list, but we hope that it gives you a bit of a basic understanding over whether or not the studio version is a must-have for you, or if you can just get away with using the free version and consider upgrading later on down the line. But as far as price goes, DaVinci Resolve is the clear winner. Now, this section might come as a shock to some, as we're actually going to be talking about who these products are each marketed towards, as, believe it or not, this actually kind of matters, and it'll help you to understand why each of these products stand where they do. Here's what it comes down to. Adobe's marketing to video editors is based on the idea that everybody else, including the artsy cool people, are using it. Even their most recent marketing stream has celebrities like Billie Eilish, showcasing that they use the Creative Cloud suite to be more, well, creative. Blackmagic, on the other hand, is taking the professional approach. No, really, all their stuff is really high quality professionals are using our products. And there's a reason that you always see other Blackmagic products found within the resources for DaVinci Resolve. Even their splash screens and help support documents have color control panels, Blackmagic cameras, and basically whatever peripherals you need to deck out your studio into a fully fledged video command station. This is why Blackmagic can literally give away such a powerful free version of their software, because it supports their ecosystem of really expensive, yet admittedly freaking cool products. Editing Blackmagic raw footage from a Blackmagic camera in DaVinci Resolve instead of Premiere Pro is just beautiful. They even give away a free version of DaVinci Resolve Studio when you buy a Blackmagic camera. So, need I say any more? So what's the point of this section? Okay, here's the thing. This is not a section intended to get you to see one piece of software as superior to the other, but more to give you a bit of a backstory over why each company has taken the particular approach that it has, and to let you rest assured that you don't need to worry about why each is priced the way that it's priced, but more so just to ask, what is your dollar better spent on? But the one thing that we can't say with certainty is that you need to download Resolve right now for free.
Just do it! Make your dreams come true!
So when it comes to performance, one of the benchmarks for success that everybody seems obsessed about is render and export times. And I gotta be honest with you, I've always been a little bit confused about why this holds such a high standard in everybody's mind. I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand why people obsess over this. It's really easy to test for, you get really clear, concise numbers, you can make sure that things are pretty much equal when testing against multiple different pieces of software or platforms, but when it comes to the actual amount of time that's spent in my workflow, the vast majority of it is on the actual creation of the project, and the actual amount of time that I spend rendering, exporting, and delivering the final project is a small, tiny fraction by comparison. That being said, if you find that your particular workflow has a higher percentage of time spent in that area, then you're gonna get a bit of an advantage when using DaVinci Resolve. And part of that has to do with the fact that there's a greater reliance on the GPU when, at least compared to Premiere Pro, which is a lot more CPU driven. Now, exporting is great, but what I care a lot more about is the performance experience I get when doing things like adding footage, scrubbing, cutting, playing back footage, you know, editing. Now, unfortunately for Premiere Pro, I did notice that Resolve tends to do a better job when spreading the workload out among other computer components. Most notably with that greater emphasis put on the GPU. So in Premiere Pro, it's a lot more likely that you're going to be underusing the potential of your graphics card, especially if you shelled out for something really nice. DaVinci Resolve, on the other hand, will help you to have a lot more of a snappy, fast playback experience, and yes, better rendering and exporting, as long as you have a good GPU. If you don't, be prepared to wait for just a little bit. There is a reason why Blackmagic Design sells their own external GPU setup. Because laptop use in DaVinci Resolve can be challenging depending on the laptop of your choice. That's not to say that Premiere Pro is an absolute dream on a laptop, because it's not always an absolute dream on a laptop. But what happens when you put more emphasis on the GPU is that you do take a bit of a hit when you're not able to pack as much punch into a smaller space. Now, both software has their own particular solutions for these sorts of problems. Blackmagic, like I mentioned before, sells an eGPU setup, and they also have the ability for you to choose different graphics cards if multiple are available, or even select multiple graphics cards to work at the same time. Super cool in my opinion, but I don't personally want to spend a lot of money just to get a bit of a better performance boost. So I actually prefer to go for a software-based solution. Now, one of the things that I much prefer in Premiere Pro is the way that you can work with proxy files. Resolve seems to be putting a lot of emphasis on the idea that they want to make your proxy files still look somewhat good. And to be honest, that's kind of appreciated. Again, getting back to that mindset of the idea that you might have clients watching you edit in your studio. But there are still projects when I've been working on where I just want zero latency when working with my footage, no matter my computer's hardware. And I'm sure that as editors, you've said to yourself at some point in time, I know what my footage looks like. I just want to be able to move it around, place it in order, even if it looks like digital dog shit while doing so. With Premiere Pro, you can actually set up your proxies to some ungodly tiny resolution, and then when you toggle your proxies on and off, you get disgustingly poor quality, but it's absolutely buttery smooth. If you're editing on the go with a low-powered laptop and you need to make changes fast, this can be an absolute lifesaver. And it doesn't have to stay like that. Piece together your edit, bippity-boppity-boo, and then toggle proxies back on again. There, you've gotten all your quality back now that 90% of the placement is done. Options like this have absolutely saved me in the past, like same-day wedding edits for clients. And even though DaVinci Resolve technically has a workaround that could be similar to this, the actual application of it takes enough time that it might actually just be worth it to wait through the lag of your hungry footage on your low-power laptop. That being said, you're not always going to be editing on a laptop from 2001, and as I mentioned before, Blackmagic kind of wants you to be editing like this. So let's just wrap this section up. Both software work great in optimal conditions, and Premiere Pro does have a slight edge when working on the go because it doesn't need as many bulky workarounds in some cases, but DaVinci Resolve does have an actual performance advantage. Its greater emphasis on the GPU means that DaVinci Resolve wins this round. Oh, Premiere Pro, you've mistreated me far too many times in this section. Premiere Pro is not stable, and I've actually been surprised about how much more dependent I can be on DaVinci Resolve while it's still in its public beta. Now, to be fair, along with that instability comes a wealth of resources to be able to deal with those problems, like online forums, YouTube videos, and even direct product support from Adobe. So if you actually ran into a monumental problem, I would actually feel a little bit more comfortable that you'd be able to fix it quickly inside of Premiere as opposed to Resolve. But this section is called stability, not fast problem fixability. So again, it's a quick section, but the edge goes to DaVinci Resolve. The timeline functionality for each of these two pieces of software is surprisingly similar. They both use the traditional timeline format as opposed to something more unique like Final Cut Pro X's magnetic timeline. Both let you position your clips in 3D space with essentially an infinite number of possible video and audio tracks to work with. In fact, for me, the key differences between these two timelines come down to really small details that do more to nudge me as opposed to pull me towards one software over the other. Premiere Pro has a more traditional feel, with hard right angles and harsh edges that make things feel like they're easy to distinguish and understand. While Resolve, on the other hand, has a more modern feel with rounded edges for their media clips, which feel almost slightly inspired by Final Cut Pro X as far as the visual design goes. So far, these are just some surface-level visual aesthetic preferences, but there are some key functional differences that I've personally noticed and I think are worth pointing out. First of all, just as an example, both of these programs have a slip function, where you can keep the position of the clip where it is in 3D space, but simply make that portion of the clip contain an earlier or later part of what was shot. Now, what you just saw was a visual representation of this happening in Premiere Pro, but that actually doesn't happen when you edit in Premiere Pro. That's something that I created myself to help show what's actually going on. If you actually do this in Premiere Pro, you don't get that nice little visualization, you actually just get some starting and ending time codes, as well as the starting and ending frame that you're working with. Now in Resolve, on the other hand, you actually do have this visual indication of your clip length and where it is in comparison to all of what's available. I can't express to you guys how much I love this. It's one of those subtle little details that make the program feel like it was less created by programmers and more by video editors. I never thought I would need this particular function, but as soon as I found it in Resolve, using the slip tool in Premiere Pro just sort of lost its magic. Now, where the timeline in Premiere Pro really shines, at least I feel like, is its ability to help you edit lightning fast. Premiere seems to be optimized so that your hands can literally go at the same speed as your brain. Here's a good example. Both programs let you ripple delete an item, and have the timeline close in the gap held by that previous clip. But Premiere has additional shortcut keys for Ripple Trim Previous and Ripple Trim Next, which lets you take your placement of the playhead and decide to cut everything on that clip behind the playhead or in front of it. Another good example is the Extend Edit key, where you can highlight a particular cut, and then wherever that playhead is, when you hit the E key, will make that cut appear exactly at that spot. Really, shortcut keys like these, where you're making one particular task just a little bit faster, but that one task is going to be done over and over and over and over and over again, really helps you to accumulate more time saved during the course of your entire edit. And on top of that, being able to get into the zone editing partially has to do with having zero latency between your brain, your hands, and what's actually happening on your timeline. Just to be clear though, Resolve's version 16 update has an entire new section dedicated to just taking that first pass at cutting your film together to make that process even faster than in the traditional edit timeline. And while I totally recognize the improvements made here, I just don't feel personally like it's quite reached that lightning fast speed of Premiere Pro. To be fair, it might just be a matter of personal preference for me, as the kind of content we produce here has a lot of quick cutting that will actually take advantage of really specific shortcut keys like these. And that's my personal preference, especially having come from the world of editing wedding videos where sometimes the client wants same-day edits. But I fully understand and realize that a lot of times piecing together a film isn't about blazing fast speed so much as it is spending a lot of time on that one moment to make sure that every single cut is exactly the right frame. We could spend forever on this with more examples, and each timeline has a slew of its own pros and cons, but really, at the end of the day, it feels a little bit more like a personal preference as opposed to a clear winner, so this one for me is a tie. Now, just a little bit more of a broader scope than the timeline is literally everything else. Okay, well, I mean everything else that you can see within your frame, which is your workspace. And here we can see a couple different approaches taken by these two programs. We have a more guided approach from DaVinci Resolve, and we have a bit more of a you can do whatever you want approach from Premiere Pro. With Premiere, you have the capability to set your workspace in literally any shape that you want. Move windows and panels around to create something super efficient for your project needs, or just something really interesting. And while they've got suggested tabs to switch to for different steps along the editing process, these are never necessarily given a priority over top of your own created workspaces. You can even get rid of those default workspaces if you like and replace them with your own. DaVinci Resolve, on the other hand, has a more guided step-by-step process with these tabs laid out for you at the bottom here. Load your media into the workspace, start to assemble it, and work with it in the Edit tab. Add effects and composites with the Fusion tab, color it, then work with audio in the Fairlight section. Then when you're ready to export it, you can easily manage that process in the Deliver tab. I gotta say, in most cases, I don't really like this Apple-styled hand-holding approach, but to be honest, this particular implementation doesn't so much feel like it restricts me so much as gives me nicely labeled freedoms. To each their own, but I actually really like this workspace layout format in DaVinci Resolve. almost as much as I like Premiere Pro's ability to do whatever you want. So it's a little bit of a personal opinion, and this is a little bit too much of a difference to have an apples to apples comparison, so I'm going to suggest that you look at these and ask which one would suit your own personal style best. And for me, this one is another draw. This one isn't even a competition. DaVinci Resolve has been an industry leader in color work for years, and the fact that they're upgrading their software to be a better editor from start to finish hasn't taken away from their ability to work with color at all. We're not sticking around with this one for too long. Premiere Pro is good with color, but DaVinci Resolve is freaking amazing! Treating each clip with their node-based approach gives you an unprecedented amount of control when taking your footage through the process of color correction and color grading. Highly refined masking, power windows, integrated noise reduction, and a slew of other scopes and color wheels. It's just not fair. Next section. Now, here's always the topic that comes up when comparing Premiere Pro to another piece of software. Dynamic linking, right? It allows you to take parts of your edit and be able to work with them in a more refined way in other programs like Audition or After Effects. However, the flip side is that DaVinci Resolve actually does have other tangential programs that work in a similar way to Audition and After Effects. For audio, you've got Fairlight, and for compositing, you've got Fusion. But here's the thing, not only do these programs also work flawlessly with DaVinci Resolve, they're actually baked right into DaVinci Resolve. All you have to do is press one of these tabs here, and boom, you're in that other program working with your edit with absolutely no interruptions. Now look, even though these programs were designed to do pretty much literally exactly the same thing, work with audio or do compositing, the functional use of them once you get inside the program is actually pretty different. And you're gonna have people who absolutely swear by using either one or the other, but what my job is to assume that you're either coming in fresh having tried neither of these two pieces of software, or you're going to be switching from one to the other, or at least considering it in either direction. So I gotta take that into account when we go through this particular section. Either way, there's gonna be a bit of a learning curve, so here's my personal verdict. The audio software that goes along with each of these two programs is great. They're each amazingly powerful, they allow you to use an insane number of effects and tweak your audio to be just right, and they're both pretty easy to use. So for the moment, we're gonna be putting these two programs aside, and what we're really gonna be focusing on is the difference with the compositing software. So when we talk about the difference between Fusion and After Effects, I gotta say, personally, I'm less of a fan of Fusion, and I know that's my own personal bias. And keep in mind, there's a reason why Fusion is used by so many studios on insanely high-level productions. It's because it's an amazing piece of software, but this isn't a comparison between Fusion and After Effects, it's a comparison between Resolve and Premiere Pro. So what my job kind of is to look at more of a casual user, or at least a user that's not going to be spending weeks and weeks and weeks tweaking one single shot inside of either Fusion or After Effects. I'm looking at users who are going to be spending the vast majority of their time in either Resolve or Premiere Pro. So what that means for me is ease of use and how quickly can you learn the software becomes a big point of the conversation. And for whatever reason, the gods of the internet have just decided that Adobe After Effects has a lot more resources online to be able to learn quickly. Now, some of you might be thinking that that's a strange point to hit on. Shouldn't we be looking at what each of these two pieces of software has within them and which one is more powerful? Maybe not. The truth is that I tend to use After Effects a lot to help boost my projects in Premiere Pro. And I'm by all means not a beginner user. But what I find is that no matter what I tend to throw at Adobe After Effects, it's so much more powerful, and I'm not even scratching the surface of what it's actually capable of. And the same is true within Fusion. 99% of users are not going to be pushing this program beyond what it can actually do. So you're not concerned with, can this program handle what I'm going to throw at it? You're more concerned with, how quickly can I pull off this effect? And how easy or frustrating is that experience while I'm doing it? And so when it comes to new, beginner, or even intermediate users, you're going to see a bend towards Adobe After Effects because of that ease of use factor and a more forgiving learning curve. And if you don't believe me, let's just do a quick example to show you what I mean. Do you remember back in the price section when we were looking at the rotating numbers of the increasing Premiere Pro price monthly subscription? The way that I actually pulled off that effect was to bring it into After Effects. Threw in a quick slider control and some expressions, and there we go. The effect is easy. But regardless of the fact that it's kind of simple when you know how to do it, the problem is knowing how to do it to begin with. If you didn't know that's what you had to do, how would you actually acquire that information? And that's where learning resources come in. I was able to find countless tutorials to get this exact effect within After Effects. For comparison's sake, I tried looking up how to get this effect in Fusion, and I had only 2 search results for tutorials on the topic. And even though they were great tutorials, I was still missing a few pieces of key information to apply it to my particular circumstance. And when I tried searching for specifically Fusion tutorials on this counting number effect, the Fusion tutorials were actually buried underneath a bunch of After Effects tutorials, even though After Effects or Adobe weren't included in the search terms. This is a pretty common effect to pull off, so I'm glad that there's a tutorial on it, but the more deep you get into different types of effects, the more likely you'll find gaps in the tutorial catalog for Fusion. But please don't mistake what I'm saying, and please don't discount Fusion. If you're actually looking at getting into high-level VFX work or looking to get really, really good at compositing, actually you should take a look at Fusion, maybe even over Adobe After Effects. Like I said before, there's reasons that Hollywood studios are actually using Fusion. It's a little less forgiving for new users, but once you actually get past that insane learning curve, you can do a lot of incredible things, and that node-based system of working with effects might actually be more beneficial to you in the long run. But at the end of the day, like I mentioned before, this is still a review between DaVinci Resolve and Premiere Pro. And when we're taking into account that 99% of the user base, we are giving the edge to Premiere Pro because of the ease of use factor of Adobe After Effects. So at the end of the day, what do I recommend for you? Well, like we've said before,
Do it!
But seriously, there are ways that each of these 2 programs allow you to test out their software for free. DaVinci Resolve, like we've mentioned, has their free version, and Premiere Pro has a 7-day free trial. If at the end of that 7-day free trial, you actually still want to try out and keep using it, you can just do that first month for pay, and then cancel after that if you really don't like it. If you don't like it at the end of that first month, you've only lost, say, $20-ish, and if you don't like DaVinci Resolve, you didn't pay anything anyways, and you can still keep the software. But looking back at all the different sections that we covered, it's kind of hard not to say that DaVinci Resolve won, at least on paper. But that being said, I still stand by my statement that I think you should download both of these pieces of software and try them out to see which one jives better with you. Some people will prefer Premiere Pro, some people will prefer DaVinci Resolve, just based on a user experience of what it feels like to actually use these 2 pieces of software. Then once you've done that, take into account everything: price, performance, stability, other ancillary products that go alongside them, and then come to your own executive decision. If you end up going down the Premiere Pro route, you're probably going to find an easier time with the learning curve through a wider selection of online tutorials and online resources, as well as a wider array of plugins and templates to help kickstart the awesomeness of your projects early on. To top it all off, you'll have a higher likelihood that your own circle of friends, as well as clients, have somewhat of a background or familiarity with Premiere Pro. But that does come at a much higher cost, especially in the long run, as well as a piece of software that has known problems in the past with stability and crashing. Whereas if you go down the Resolve route, you're getting awesome video editing software for much less, if not nothing, with an extra emphasis on color workflow and a bend towards the professional studio user. The downside is fewer resources for learning, and even though you do have awesome compositing software baked right in, you might be less inclined to try it out and start using it than something like After Effects, depending on how quick you are to take up the node-based compositing approach. And even though you can pump out projects in Resolve extremely quickly, you may find that you're doing it just a tad slower than you otherwise would be in Premiere Pro, unless you're talking about exclusively rendering and exporting, in which case Resolve has the edge there as well. In the end, regardless of what software you choose, you're going to find that you're able to make some incredibly high quality video projects. And I will say though that if I was just beginning my journey as a video editor today, I would be far more inclined to try the free version of DaVinci Resolve and then consider upgrading to the studio version later on if I thought that I needed those particular features. For my own workflow personally, I'm satisfied enough with my relationship with Premiere Pro to not switch over to DaVinci Resolve, despite feeling like a little bit of a minority of people who are making videos on this topic. But I will say that I am still keeping DaVinci Resolve installed on my computer as that cheeky little mistress on the side. Those color grading and finishing features are far too powerful and awesome not to have available at all times. Now, there's always a concern that whoever's making these comparison videos is bringing in their own personal bias and making recommendations just based entirely on their personal preference. And while that's pretty much impossible to avoid, let me go ahead and clear up a few things. I've used both of these pieces of software on countless different projects. And while Premiere Pro has been my NLE of choice for years, Premiere Pro has also stabbed me in the back on occasion. Like, for example, crashing at the absolute worst possible times, not having support for particular codecs. That's actually one of the reasons that I went and switched over to try DaVinci Resolve in the first place, because it was able to handle some Blackmagic raw footage when Premiere Pro couldn't. So to be clear for myself personally, I absolutely love Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve. And while I do tend to aim towards Premiere Pro for myself personally, I also do have some shortcomings with it that I'm still kind of upset about. Whereas DaVinci Resolve, I have a bit more of a neutral feeling towards. As for our own personal bias here at Motion Array, there was a time back when we only provided templates for Premiere Pro and After Effects, but that hasn't been the case for a long time now. In fact, we have templates for everything from Premiere Pro and After Effects to Final Cut Pro X, Adobe Rush, and yes, even DaVinci Resolve. So we really don't have a financial incentive for you to choose one of these pieces of software over the other, which is why we keep telling you to download DaVinci Resolve for free. Like seriously, test it out, play around with it, and if you don't like it at the end of the day, you still have industry-leading color capabilities at the tip of your fingers. But guys, that's it for me. If you wanted to save some time working in either Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, or even Final Cut or Adobe Rush for that matter, feel free to check out all of our templates, stock footage, royalty-free music, and, well, anything that can make your project look and sound that much more awesome. But guys, thanks so much for stopping by, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.